Okay, welcome back everybody. Who's a first year student? If you knew it was going to be like this in Michigan, would you have accepted the offer to come to the University of Michigan? Let me see the hands for no. Okay, yeah, be honest. Well, I'm really glad none of you knew what you were signed up for. And that continues probably to be true of coming to class. You all were not here last week, nor was I. You all visited buildings. And the week before we didn't have class because of snow day. So I still don't know any of these people. And there was supposed to have been a better setup for Andrew Hinton today. As you may recall, the progression went from suchness and things to places to then to environment. And we didn't get to do as much around places as I wanted, but it turns out what Andrew has to say about environment has a lot to do with place, so I think it'll get covered. Andrew Hinton is somebody that I've admired for a really long time. When many of us started out in information architecture, there weren't a lot of people talking about information architecture like architecture. There was plenty of people talking about it like library science, plenty of people talking about it like software, but Andrew Hinton for a really long time has been thinking about this and studying it and approaching it like architecture. And he wrote a chapter in this Reframing Information Architecture book that came out not too long ago, and I'm just going to read a tiny bit. Is this okay if I read a tiny bit of this before you get going?
Sure.
Okay. So a little history lesson from Andrew Hinton. He says in this book, and we can grill him on this later, as a practicing information architect since the late 1990s, I've been preoccupied with how viscerally we experience the things and places that we make, and that we make out of mere language. How is it that human life can be so deeply affected by words on a page or screen? Why do we feel as if we are inhabiting actual places when we navigate, converse, and transact within structures that are made only with text tags and network protocols? Some of my earliest work as a professional information architect involved creating the plans for spaces and places that existed only online, but that were just as important and as impactful to human activity of organizations as any physical building or campus would be. I saw that not unlike the multi-user dungeons and BBSs I visited with my first modem in the late 1980s, the web was also a medium for creating structures, not just for organizing inventories of objects like pages and products, but for architecting places, and that one architectural decision could make or break any given place's ability to succeed at fulfilling its intended purpose. So for years I've been working on the hunch that digital technology has enabled us to create environments with language in a way that we could not quite do before. And I think that's one of the central conceits of this whole class, is that something is different about these digital places that we now make. That somehow information has become a kind of material that we're using for a new sort of architectural work. Back in 2002, in a manifesto I participated in creating for what later became the Information Architecture Institute, we stated that this work is an act of architecture, the structuring of raw information into shared information environments with useful navigable form that resists entropy and reduces confusion. This is a new kind of architecture that designs structures of information rather than of bricks, wood, plastic, and stone. People live and work in these structures just as they live and work in their homes, offices, factories, and malls. These places are not virtual. They're as real as our own minds. These were lofty ideas, but I would have been hard-pressed to back them up with any hard proof or sound theories. That was 2000 or so?
2002, yeah.
As you all have come to a little bit of familiarity with, now the theories and the research, he's had the time to do it. And I couldn't be more thrilled that he's here. And so he took a look at how you responded to that book. And I think that's what we're going to talk about.
Hi, everybody. What I was going to do is, I guess, a quick agenda of what we're going to do today. I think you emailed this, but
yes.
I'll go over it real quick. So I think the idea is that I was going to tell you just a little bit about that, although that actually set up pretty well.
You're welcome.
About the book and what it is and why I wrote it. Since, author is sitting here, might as well tell you that stuff. And then we're going to look at some examples from your Pinterest stuff that you did, which was delightful. There's not time to do them all. I just sort of grabbed some that I felt like, and this might have been a problem because I was grabbing ones that I was like, okay, I know some stuff I could say about that, but then I realized, well, the ones that didn't necessarily immediately click for me might have been even more interesting. But there's a mixture of those in there. About 12 or 13 of them. So I thought, those of you who are here who put those up could kind of talk a little bit about what you meant, and then we could kind of riff off of that in kind of a conversation and kind of work our way through those. Do that for a while, then like a break, and then come back together, and you were given an exercise that I think we're going to put you into some small groups for.
Your group leaders have a facilitator guide, and we're going to do some.
Just turn you loose to do some stuff, and then you're going to talk about some things some more. So I'm only going to be doing some of the yakking in here today, as opposed to some other times I've visited a dance class when I basically just yacked for, I think everybody, they turned into dust-covered skeletons by the time I was done. So the book. So, I was hired, this is after two other weird career paths-ish, academic paths that didn't really pan out in the real world for me. I ended up being hired as a quote-unquote copywriter. I had no training as a copywriter per se, but I was hired as a copywriter into an agency that was a sort of new digital interactive agency that was a wing of a small advertising firm in North Carolina. This is after I'd done some other web-oriented online stuff for pay, but it was mainly, again, like technical writing type stuff. But the whole time I was doing that, I was also doing other things kind of off the books, like setting up Quake servers and building websites for Quake clans and scoreboards and stuff like that, or just goofing around online and learning how to make things, and then getting some of my work done. But anyway, this is the first time that I got hired in as a job where we're actually going to make software, we're going to make websites, and you're going to be this copywriter. We're going to pair you with an art director like they do in an ad firm. Okay. And they started making stuff. We started making stuff for people, and I was like, well, no, this isn't just writing. You realize that, right? Like, I can't just write stuff. Like, there's structure here. I mean, we have to link to things. We have all these links. They're linking to each other, and they have to have some rhyme or reason as to why we're doing that, and there's a reason why these things are here to begin with. And when you're here, what kind of a place is this? And this is the way I was talking to clients about the internet then. I was like, the web is a sort of place, and it has properties to it that are a little different and a little the same. And I didn't really have the language at that time to talk about it. It just felt that way. All this was gut level hunch stuff. And it just seemed that way because I didn't come at it from an information perspective. I was coming at it from having dwelled online for a while and known what it was like to dwell online and to visit a MUD, for example, a multi-user dungeon. You guys familiar with MUDs are? It's a multi-user domain, and then there are the other ones like multi-user shared hallucination, which is a mush, multi-user object-oriented, which is a moo. So anyway, being in those and realizing some of them were really successful and thriving, partly because of the way they were structured. The ones that had that brought you through a character creation process that worked really well, and then put you out into an environment that was highly social, where you could interact with other characters or whatever, that worked. The ones that didn't architect it right, no other way to put it, didn't work. Like they were just sort of these. It was interesting to go, in north and look and see the interesting things that they had made, but it was like abandoned, right? It was just interesting to see for what was made, but there wasn't any living going on there. And so to me, this idea of structuring online places made a lot of sense. So anyway, then I heard about these people who talked about this thing called information architecture, and I was like, okay, that phrase sounds like what this smells like to me. And that's how all that got started. But like I said, it's all been hunches and kind of half-farted philosophical ramblings on my part, because frankly, I'm a really lazy not disciplined person in many ways, and it was easy to get up and make some slides and talk about this stuff and be like, see, I'm pointing generally in a direction, and isn't that interesting? Until I was encouraged to write a book, and then I realized, okay, yeah, I'm going to write about this, and I started writing, and it was more of that, yeah, kind of cool, see, and this cool, and this cool, and then I realized, no, this is not, wait, I can't actually put all this in print in a book, which I think is interesting too, because some people say, well, the book is obsolete, but to me, the fact that I had to make this into a book meant that it's a very different thing than it would have been otherwise. And I realized I need to actually know what the hell I'm saying, because I know too many smart people in my sphere who are going to read this and go, yeah, you're fucking all wet. Like, you haven't read this. Have you looked at this? And even now that it's in print, I've got people saying that and pointing out things that I didn't know about. But I can be like, yeah, I can't read everything. But I did read a hell of a lot, and here's the path that I took, right? So at least I've got a path that's legitimate, and actually, I think actually has an argument that's founded on something. So, you know, I used to think that the information space or whatever, it just felt like this weird metaphysical thing, and I didn't know. It turns out that there are things we can point to in the world and say, oh, no, we have bodies, and they interact with our environment, and now that our environment doesn't just have physical things, but language in it, which it's had for a long, long, long time, millions of years, probably, at least a million, and then written language, which is a whole other very recent thing, encoded language, right? Writing is encoded talk. It's code that we learn to read and translate back into talk in our own heads. And then just recently we took that writing and we turned it into this digital stuff. And that digital stuff, because it got separated from physicality, it's got very different properties. And it's messing around with the properties of everything else. It's messing around with what semantics and physical information mean to us, right? So that was the big aha once I realized that information isn't one thing, it's a number of different things, which is some of what we're going to be talking about today together. It was an amazing discovery process, and over the 3 or so years that I worked on this thing, it really rewired my head so that I have a hard time actually remembering what it was like not to think about things this way now. And when I see stuff in the world around me, I'm taking it apart in my head and thinking, well, that layer is doing this, and this layer is doing that, and it's helping me do my job better. So this isn't just all philosophical kind of mumbo-jumbo, but then I have to go do my day job. This has affected my day job. This way of thinking has reshaped the way that I go about making and helping my clients and making things for them. So that was a quick.
You might want to hit mute. Slack is blowing up in the background.
Yeah. Slack is busy.
It's my computer. It's not his fault. It's mine.
Oh no, wait. No, that's pause. That's not there. Okay. All right. So, any questions about like that little spiel I just gave before we dive into some of the little Pinteresty things? Anything you were burning question you wanted to ask about just in general about the book? I just didn't want to be rude and just plow ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
One small question. When you write for O'Reilly, do you get to choose the animal?
No. So, a fun bit of contextual narrative around O'Reilly is that, so the reason I ended up writing for O'Reilly is because somebody I knew, Peter Morville, who had encouraged me to write a book to begin with a long time ago, he ended up being the main contact I had to kind of connect me with an editor. And the editor was like, okay, yeah, this is kind of not a how-to book. This is going to be kind of a how to think about a book. And so yeah, I think we could tackle this, though. This is different for us, but we like it. And so it ended up happening. But the thing is, it's a weird fit for O'Reilly, because O'Reilly's animal books go back to like, you know, the Camel Pearl book, things like that, right? Like the idea was, I think that we're writing about code, and what picture do we put on a picture about on a book about code other than the code, right? Like there's no stock photography that works for, you know, JavaScript, you know, whatever. So they had this idea that we're going to put these endangered animals on books. And so the books became, you know, the Camel book, this book, that book. Some of them, they're really kind of like legendary O'Reilly animal books. Well, that in order to scale that, you have to keep picking animals, and you don't necessarily let your authors pick their animal because then you end up with all these arguments about, well, no, we can't use that because somebody else has that or whatever. So they really determine the animal, and they say, here's the funny thing is, they kind of say that the official story is that it's kind of random, but I know for a fact that some of the books that are about certain things, the picture it could have been anything, but the animal they picked was more relevant than something else would have been, right? But on some of them, it kind of doesn't matter. It's like, okay, here's another, freaking CSF book or whatever, and it's like, okay, yeah, animal. But like the one that's designing for emerging technologies, I think that has something on there that's a little more relevant. I can't remember. I do remember one years ago, the one that the people who invented that blogging platform, were the ones who made, it was a couple, and they made, was it Movable Type? I think it was Movable Type they invented. They wrote a book about blogging, and it had all these frightening kittens on it, like these they look like house cats, but they weren't house cats. There was some breed of, or some species of, or family or whatever of cat. And it was freaky. I was like, I don't want anything like that. So I think once we went through, they prematurely had me in the system and had sent me their behemoth machine or whatever that tracks the book and hits a certain date before the originally agreed upon published date, which I blew by about 2 years. It spat out an animal cover at me and said, "Hey, here's your cover." And they give you a chance to give feedback, but it was like, if you remember those horses, I'm going on way too long about this. But anyway, remember those horses from your prehistoric animal books, like dinosaur books, and there's always this page like, here's these horses, but they have these really ugly heads. They have these weird ridge on their head. I mean, maybe some of you love all horses, no matter what their shape, but these are ugly horses. One of those apparently still exists. It was on my book cover, and I was like, no, weren't we saying it wasn't going to be an animal book, Simon? I was like, so luckily that went by. I don't know who ended up with that. When this showed up, then I was like, you know what? I'm not going to fight it. If it's going to be an animal book, this is actually a good-looking animal. Let's stick with it. That's fine. So it really, technically, there is no real connection, but I did manage a reference to the animal in the book where I talk about how the green bee eater, which is what this is, how it uses an embodied cognition kind of way of catching its prey. Like it can catch insects. It's a tiny, tiny brain, but it can catch insects in a way that a giant brain robot can't. Why is that? So it ended up being kind of a good reference point. But yeah, the context is completely off whack, which is kind of fun. All right, so I kind of put these kind of, maybe in order, of the kind of arc of the book. And the arc of the book basically starts with physical environment, and then how do bodies and physical environments interact, and how does a body know what to do in that environment? Know being a kind of weird word to put there in some ways. And because that's the core. And then at some point, this weird species that we're a part of developed this ability to have symbolic language, which, yes, there are lots of wonderful animals in the animal kingdom who can signal to one another in really interesting ways, or learn to mimic things in ways that seem like language. We are many degrees of separation removed from that in terms of how bizarrely different. It's definitely an issue of a scale, difference in scale being a radical difference in kind, that symbolic language, the way that we use it as a species, is unique in creation as far as we know. And creation being one of those weird little words. So anyway, so language, right, kind of having grown out of that in a weird branch of humanity. And then this very recent thing of this digital information. And then getting into how do all these things play with each other for good or ill. So starting with the environment bit, there was this one, and they quote the book here, the structure of the environment is in essence its joinery between surfaces and substances So whose is this?
Caitlin, is that you?
Yeah. Okay. So tell us about what you got from this.
Okay, so my science chunk was about the principles of nesting.
Okay.
So I read those few pages along with what we're supposed to read. Had to read, of course, a little before and after to get some context, of course. And I have it in my notes is you talk about how we perceive information. We're largely perceiving information about its surfaces, which are formed by the interface between any 2 or 3 states of matter, solid, liquid, or gas. So this was mine. I decided just to find like a range of surfaces, a variety of surfaces, because it's basically like how I guess we never think about that space that is between like the surface and our environment. That's how we perceive things is at its surface level. That's why I kind of tried to get in there a little bit. Yeah.
They were perceiving things in terms of their surface level.
Yeah.
Like the things that we can see in front of us. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks. Yeah, that issue of, well, the principle of nesting is this whole other thing related to that, and which we can maybe touch on some more later, but, well, I'll talk about it for just a second. But yeah, this idea that this comes out of this guy, James J. Gibson, which those of you who read anything from some particular part of the book that might have mentioned him, I mean, he comes up a lot. I was trying to figure out, well, what is information anyway? I just figured that there was some standard thing out there, that places like information schools could point to say, oh yeah, this is what information is. Turns out there is no thing you can point to that says this is what, there are things, and some people assume that one thing is more authoritative than another thing, but there's really no one thing that says this is what information is that everybody agrees to universally. And I realized that a pluralist approach was better than saying that there was just one thing. And so there's at least 3 ways, and that's kind of what this ended up breaking down into. So this guy, James J. Gibson, was what's called an ecological psychologist. He's called that because he invented it. And he's kind of, this is not standard science. It's being re-embraced and taken more seriously now by this whole school of thought called embodied cognition, especially the ones call themselves radical embodied cognition. And this is all really recent. And basically the idea is that cognitive psychology has been wrong for a generation, ever since it was kind of invented around the mid-20th century. That it took too literally the computing kind of logical model as a way to assume is how we work. And so you're reading a book by J.J. Gibson about, that's what people call him, and instead of seeing things about like, well, here is how the eye is constructed, and this is what the brain does, he's talking about surfaces and planes and objects in the world, and it sounds really primitive. It sounds like this primitive cosmology. There is earth and there is sky. That just sounds like Native American mythology or something, It's primitive for a purpose, though, because the way we perceive things is based on very primitive principles. We are blobs of flesh and bone in a concrete world of things. And there are lots of, little organisms out there that live just fine, that don't think about what they're doing. They just perceive enough to survive. That is at the core of how we do. So, this idea that things that come together make structure. One thing coming together with another. If there was just one plane, there would be no structure, right? Because you wouldn't know the difference. It's the difference between one plane meeting another plane, or one kind of matter meeting another kind of matter. Gas, which I'm walking around in, it's a medium. Solid, okay, I can stand on it. I'm a terrestrial being, and part of being a terrestrial being is that I evolved, my species evolved with those things. So this is great, because it's saying that, yeah, the surface of things as we encounter them that's the world. And if it's hiding something else, we don't know that something else is there unless we learn it somehow. Or unless we can go around it or pick it up or something like that. All right, cool, thank you. So who did this one? Tell us about this one. Yes.
So this is about the embodied cognition section,
Mm-hmm.
and I did not write any notes because I don't do that.
No, that's okay.
Write about information.
I don't mean to put you totally on the spot.
Yeah, it's about how our body through our body we understand things, and it's not necessarily brain first, but body first and environment first.
Mm-hmm.
So thinking about toilet is a pretty good example of this. Even if you believe it or if you don't believe it, you can have a pretty solid debate around that space.
Yeah.
The body sort of preempts you a lot of times, and if you go into a foreign environment, like what is the toilet, different things happen.
Well,
I'm not going into too much detail. You can-
Yeah, I love the example. We're all adults. Hey, I love the example because
You know, kids have this as an issue also.
no, they.
This is a joke.
Oh, I'm sorry. But no, seriously though. No, they. That's one of those things that in a certain culture you learn really early, and you know, of necessity, because we don't want poop all over everything. So as a species, we've got rules around that. They go back a long way. You put your poop over here, you put your food over here. You know, we keep these things separate. If we didn't, we wouldn't be around long. When you've got lots of people together, you have to have systems for dealing with all of it. And when you have to have systems for dealing with all of it, you have to have technology, right? You have to have infrastructure for handling it. This is infrastructure for a really basic human need. And you would think that it would be standard, right, across all cultures. It's a pretty basic thing. Everybody poops. You've seen that book, right? It's a lovely little book. Or everyone poops. I forget about everybody. So you would think that like there wouldn't be much variety in how this works, but there is. There's a lot of it, and even within one country, like so you might go from this building to another building, and in this building when you stand up from a potty, from a toilet, it flushes itself, and if you're in that building a lot, you just get used to the toilet's going to flush itself. And you go to another building, and it takes you a week to realize I haven't been flushing after myself in this building. How rude of me. Why did I not know? But because these things are different. So one of the things in the book that gets talked about is something called invariance. Invariant with an S, or invariance, SCE, like the principle of invariance. The idea is that our environment has certain consistently, not, again, like, so one thing about embodied cognition is it's radically from the perspective of the organism, okay? So a given organism isn't around long enough to know that plate tectonic shift is happening, or that thing that used to be flat ground is now a volcano. To us, those things are pretty stable structures in our world. So for a species to actually evolve around those structures, that means that they're invariant, or the properties of them are invariant, so that even from one instance to the next, if I see something that looks like a tree, it's a kind of tree I've never seen before, but it's a lot like, it's got some properties to it that are similar to other trees I've always been around, then it's going to hold my weight. It's going to do this, it's going to do that. And then it could be that I learned that, oh no, this tree is really kind of bendy. And oh, now I know that kind of tree has an invariant quality that is different from the invariant qualities of this other tree. The solid ground I'm going to be able to walk on because it's going to hold me up. Every now and then there's quicksand, but it's rare. It's very rare. And in an environment where you've got a native population that grows up around quicksand, they learn the properties, they can tell you where the quicksand is. They know. They can tell the difference. It's just newbies that don't know the difference. Because the properties are going to be the same. For millions of years, they're going to stay the same. Is this automatically, or did I just tap it?
You tapped it.
I tapped it. I'm going to sit this down. So the thing is that we have now this ability to make stuff that we sort of in our in the book there's this thing between explicit and tacit consciousness, right? Explicit attention versus tacit attention, explicit knowledge versus tacit knowledge. 99.9 or whatever percent, it's a very scientific number. No, it's not. But most of what we do every day is tacit. It's deeply tacit. We don't think about taking steps. By now you've all seen the memes going around about like walk like a penguin in the ice. You've seen those? But okay. Well, you have to think explicitly about, oh, I have to walk like a penguin. It's icy. Walk like a penguin. You know. If you walk tacitly on the ice, you're going to fall and crack your ass, right? So you don't want to do that. So you have to think about it. At one time, all of us had to think about it until we just got used to doing it, about just regular walking. Anyway, but the ground, except for when it's icy, is pretty much the ground. Toilets can behave differently from one place to the next. We have to kind of learn. We have to think about it in ways we didn't have to think about it before. So this thing that's supposed to make our lives a little easier and quicker and be better for the environment, it's actually making our lives a little more complicated. It's adding cognitive load. It's not for or against that. I'm just saying it's another factor now to think about. Digital technology, as we talk about later, is hugely doing this to everything in our environment, right? In fact, these things tend to have some kind of digital function. But yeah, so even the language that goes into a thing like this, they couldn't just have in a million different written languages like how to do this. They had to do this IKEA build a table thing.
Does anybody read Japanese? Can anybody compare the caption? Is it?
Yeah.
It says this.
It says that?
Okay. Yeah. All right. I don't know that she wants to say what it says out loud. Honestly, I still don't quite understand what I'm looking at, but I think I would have to see the actual object.
Well, there was a breakfast bar, and under
Yeah.
Sorry.
It gets warm. Okay, falling water. Who gave us falling water? Yes. Tell us about falling water and why you picked that.
So the Falling Water is a private house for a rich family in Pittsburgh, and it was designed by Frank Lloyd Wright, and it was built on technically a waterfall, and everything, the whole structure is horizontal, nothing vertical, and then Frank Wright built it, designed it in a way that when you go onto the back, when you enter the house in the back of it, it's so dark and everything is so narrow. And then you would want to escape to the brightness, whereas the forest and the water. And I did the reading on the part where you talked about the built environment and how the structures or environment would direct people's attention, and I thought about this.
Right. Yeah, so Gibson talks a lot about the way that the environment around us, and so this is where I'll touch again on nesting. We understand our environment as a nested environment, meaning that structures are nested within structures, right? So this room, so in a built environment, we've actually reified, reification, that was one spot somebody here may have read, but reification is the principle by which we posit that a thing that we talk about or think about as some sort of a concept, we think of it as a thing that in the world, right? So like the economy, well, you can't really point at a thing called that is the economy. It's a lot of emergent processes. It's an emergent system. But you've got the stock market, you've got the housing market, you've got the job market, all these markets. But we talk about the economy, right? We reify it as a thing. Well, sometimes we reify things and in weird ways that aren't so good for us. But a lot of times buildings are basically a way of taking something that's fuzzier out in the world and actually reifying it as a concrete thing. So a building actually reifies it. A monastery reifies certain social structures that monastic order believes should be, right? So the way that they think the world ought to be, that they just talk about, then they build their buildings that way. We build a lot of buildings that way. Frank Lloyd Wright had ideas about the way the world ought to be, and the way that buildings ought to be in the world, and instantiated them, right? Reified, and then instantiated in atoms these ideas. And Gibson talks about how we understand the nested environment in a way that is understanding that this structure is within this structure. So you've got like a valley, and then you've got the trees, and this sort of grove of trees within the valley, and you've got maybe a little clearing within that, you know what I mean? Like that's how in the natural world we tend to understand things. But it's not a hierarchy. It's not a static hierarchy in the way that an information logical hierarchy is. Like logic is a language construct. It's not a natural emergent thing. So, whereas one day I might be walking through a grove of trees and this tree over here is just, I don't even notice it. Another day I think of it as a center of my world because it's got something in it that I need to eat. And all my activities kind of organize around it, right? So now I'm thinking of it being in the middle of other trees, being in the middle of some other stuff, and then there's a stream over here that I'm going to use that has something to do with whatever I'm doing with the tree. Eventually that tree in the next season is no longer bearing fruit or something, and then now I'm just fishing, and so now my world is more around the stream, and I remember the tree as being the tree place, but it's more peripheral to me now. Now it's just kind of part of the forest. So things shift, and sometimes rapidly they shift. That nestedness shifts. It's something that we have a hard time with when we make stuff because we want there to be, especially in our Western mindset, we want there to be this hierarchy, this chain of being. We want there to be one standard way to think about the world. The problem is that in the tacit kind of behavioral lives of people, there is not one standard way of thinking about the world. The way they actually behave is nested, it's more fluid. There's still structure, but it's overlappy. I like that word, overlappy. It's more permeable, and it's fluid and shifts.
That's pretty overlappy and permeable.
Yeah. So what Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, did was, he was really interested, if I'm not mistaken, because I'm not an architecture scholar at all, but he's really interested in the context of the landscape and how the thing that we make fits that context. And in blurring the boundaries between building and landscape, right? So the building that's in Grand Rapids that I toured last October has this wonderful room, kind of a great room, living room, that the way the glass is made, the leading in the glass is such that it feels almost like, they don't look like vines, they're geometrical, but at first glance it could almost be vines. So that you almost feel like you're on a veranda, like in the midst of a garden. But you're not really on a veranda in the midst of the garden. At the same time, he has a porch around it that does not have a stairway going straight down to the street because it's a private porch, right? This idea that I'm out here in my yard, on my porch, but I'm not out in my yard. And people can't just walk up and be on my porch. This is my enclave, which is playing with privacy and not privacy in public in interesting ways, because it was on a corner, a street corner. So falling water's got interesting properties like that, and so this idea that the shape of the building, if you've ever been in buildings where you're constantly turning the wrong way, these are buildings where people weren't thinking about these ecological principles.
There were some comments just there about this building.
This one, yeah. Dan was commenting on the building on the way in too. That they didn't think about the fact that if I'm in this hallway, that the shape of the hallway is sort of like pulling me along cognitively. My body is pulling my body along because something just seems like this is the way I should go if I'm going to be going out or in. There are a million different ways to do that. There's not just one standard way to do it, but there's deep principles in terms of the way you shape space to make that work. And this is touching on one in this building. It's kind of pushing you out. It's fascinating. Okay. Who? Tell us.
So the part that I was reading is about the Google Plus and how certain media allows us to be how we need to be, whereas sometimes we need the consistency throughout different medias. And you talked about the semantic consistency. And this one, as we all know, is a fountain piece by Duchamp. And in this case, it seems to be the winner is the museum context itself that destroyed the semantic meaning of a toilet. Mm-hmm. So that was my piece.
So I just smiled all over the place when I saw this. So one reason this book took so long is, as I told you, it started off almost as sort of like, here's some essays about interesting things to think about context and making software. The first 30 pages were about this. Because in early talks I had done, this was one of the first examples. Because this is all about context. Duchamp went into a shop in New York that sold plumbing stuff. And he bought this, and at least this is how the story goes. And so he was actually on the board of a group. It was in Europe, I guess. I don't think it was in the States, but he did it in the States, or maybe it wasn't in the States. I can't remember. Anyway, but he was on the board of a group that was going to do this showing, right, a gallery showing. And he submitted this piece under a false name, knowing that it was going to be rejected, just assuming that it would be rejected. Because what he did was he just took this urinal, which, we've got this lovely through line from the earlier toilet to this. took this urinal, turned it in a way that it can't actually be used anymore. I mean, even if you assumed that it was plumbed, it still wouldn't be used anymore. And he put our mutt on it and the date. Basically, the sloppiest possible label that you could stick on something to make it, to say this is a work of art. I'm just gonna, I mean, even carefully, right? It's just like, it's not even graffiti. This is an insult to graffiti. Like, it's just, right? Now, all of these, by the way, are replicas. The original, I think, was destroyed or lost. But they're pictures of the original, so he made a bunch of replicas like 20 years later and then some more later. But his staff did probably. But anyway, but the idea being that this thing got entered. And so the piece was not famous because it showed up in the gallery. It was famous because the Dadaists then took it as a cause célèbre and wrote about it and published the fuck out of it. And it just got talked about a lot because it was challenging. I mean, think about it. World War I had just happened. Everything that people thought was near and dear and fundamental, like the invariants of Western culture, were called into question. How can the things that we think of as the pillars of who we are and what is right and wrong, how can we trust them if they led us to this? Right? I mean, it was bad. You guys are hopefully by now familiar with how bad World War I was. World War II was really bad too, just in different ways and even bigger ways. And anyway, hence 20th century and irony. But World War I was pretty bad, and so these folks were like, let's just blow it up, start over, question everything. I love the Dadaist period, love it. It's all wonderful, and it made a lot of really bad art, frankly, but it made a lot of brilliant art. So this is the most. This was some British, well-regarded British art consortium or something did a study or something, and they said this was the most influential piece of art in the 20th century. Warhol happens after this, right? There's a through line all the way to Warhol. Anyway, basically what this is taking the sacred and the profane and putting them in a blender, right? Think about the course of Western art for centuries was the highest art was always religious art. Almost always, or it had to have some spin to it that justified it. All that nudity and gore had to be justified with, well, yeah, but it's Noah, or it's whatever. So this is coming out of the Victorian period still, in terms of what art is. And this is a thought bomb, right, made of language, stuck on a profane piece of plumbing. That could be any urinal. Could be any urinal. It doesn't even have to be this urinal. This may not have even been painted by Duchamp, right, the name. It's the thought, it's language. It's a piece of language destruction that makes people angry. There were riots about this shit. Because they just it didn't square. This is not natural. This is not what art is. Now in the 21st century, we take it for granted that something like this can be a work of art. This actually seems kind of old-fashioned to do something like this now. I think that's a beautiful story. I had to take it out of the book because there just wasn't room. And it ended up having, and can you imagine a O'Reilly book with 40 pages about a urinal? It just wasn't, they were kind of like, maybe this is an MIT Press book. And I'm like, no. So maybe a sequel or something. All right, thanks for that. Yes, who had the green light bulb thing? Anybody who's here today?
He's not there today.
Okay. Well, colorless green ideas sleep furiously, structured, grammatically correct nonsense. So this idea that language needs structure in order to have any sense to it, but not only structure. It has to have semantic reference. It has to have convention that it's plugged into. That colorless green ideas sleep furiously. So sort of like the panda example. You guys familiar with the eat, shoots, and leaves, right? So this idea that like a panda walks into a bar and eats a meal and then shoots everybody and then leaves, or not a bar, a restaurant, any meeting place. Shoots everybody and then leaves. It is absurd because we know that pandas don't do that. Even if they live where I live, outside in Atlanta, where there are suburbs where you're actually supposed to, I think you're legally required to own a gun in Kennesaw, Georgia. A panda probably can't get a hold of one, probably. And even if it could, it wouldn't know how to do that. So, but a computer might not know that, right? A computer might think that's perfectly appropriate. Every time I now go on Facebook, which I don't do much, so those of you, if you actually get around to reading the whole book, you'll know that I basically just beat the shit out of Facebook every 10 pages almost. Because it really was one of the generative, horrible things in the world. There are many good things about Facebook, but there are horrible things about it that generated a lot of this thinking on my part. The abuse of context. But anyway, but now that I'm in a neighborhood where people use it all the time, like I'm on there because of the neighborhood. So anyway, it's just funny to me that on Facebook and anywhere that uses other places that use the Amazon algorithm for selling, my book shows up constantly. Because I'm always looking at my Amazon page because I'm always curious how it's ranking. Partly as a sort of weird masochistic exercise that I won't go into, maybe over drinks. So it's always trying to sell me my own book, right? Because it's a stupid machine that doesn't know I wrote the goddamn book, even though the metadata says I wrote it, right? Somewhere here I've got a picture though of what was the guy's name? A. Horace Hinton or A. Horsley? A. Horsley Hinton. When my book first got put into Amazon, it somehow got married up with somebody named A. Horsley Hinton, who apparently was like an illustrator in the 19th century, and was listed as the author or co-author in places. It was weird. And I have a lot of screenshots because I thought it was just, again, it's just so fun to write a book about context and then see all the context just go to shit around it. But anyway, so it's a dumb machine, right? And no matter how smart we think we're making these things, no, they're just dumb, you know. And the thing is this: we make them so that they act smarter, so they trick us into thinking and making us comfortable. Like, oh no, this one understands me. This one knows how to tell me what to wear in the morning, or this one knows how to trade these stocks for me, or whatever. The better they get, the irony is that the more dangerous that is because it lulls us into a false sense of confidence. And then there's some primary fundamental thing about humanity that they just don't get, and they screw something major up. So colorless green ideas sleep furiously could be something that a machine would just be perfectly happy with, right? Because an idea, it wouldn't be the first thing that an idea has been anthropomorphized, right? It could be a lovely bit of poetry. Anyway. But I think it calls a lot into question about the depth of cultural convention and meaning that comes to just any piece of language. All right. Who had the name tags? Yes. Tell us about this one.
So why I came up with this was the portion of the book that I was reading was talking about context and how people think differently and respond differently in different situations. So if one person, say right now with his or her father, would respond differently to a question when the same question was posed to her, say in a different situation, say in a classroom or say in a meeting with her boss, she would respond differently to how the weather is and what she thinks about it.
Right.
It would be very different, and it's all about how someone responds to in context, and that's what I got from that part of the book.
Cool. Yeah. So the social context is really wrapped up in language, and vice versa. And yes, we have these sides to ourselves. And the thing is that doesn't mean that we're being duplicitous or hypocritical, right? It's just a natural part of life. It's just something that we don't pay attention to necessarily. If somebody says to you, well, you act differently at work than you do when you go to the club. Well, yeah. Why wouldn't I? Well, that's not lying. That's just different sides of myself that I'm emphasizing in one way or another. Perfectly acceptable, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But here's the thing. Your business is located probably in your place of work is in a place. It's in a physical place with walls. They go there. Other people go there. They dress a certain way to be there, etc. When you go to club, you're going to go there. That's another there. And it is a physically separate place. And until recently, these two things would never meet. How could they? Right? How could they overlap in any form, shape, or fashion? You know, like lots of clubs, for example, have photography rules. Like you can't bring a camera in and just take pictures willy-nilly because there's people that are having a good time. So don't do that. You have to get signatures, right? And even now there's rules around. You're not allowed to publish. At this point, in some ways, completely irrelevant and useless rules, because it used to be that publishing was physically constrained, so you could only publish through certain channels, physical channels. So there was a way to say you can't use these powerful channels of taking pieces of information and promulgating them like across infinite expanses, because there's a power in that you don't want to abuse, and so people have to give you the permission to have their picture in a thing, right? Well, there's still those rules for like official publications, but it's really hard for an individual person. Now, if you're a corporation, go at it. But you can cease and desist like crazy. But an individual person, it's really hard to control your image, right? Or any information about you anymore. So anybody can just take some snippet of something that they've got and put it up somewhere, and there it is. Or you put it up and you think this is always going to be this kind of a place. Facebook, for instance. And it turns out that no, they just changed the rules so that the walls that you thought were invariant walls between this part of Facebook and that part of Facebook just disappeared like that. Flip of a bit, right? And the world just fundamentally changed. And now all these people know that I party this way. I didn't want them to know that. That's uncomfortable, right? I mean, even if you're not doing anything really nefarious, I mean, which you're perfectly allowed to do. I'm a very open-minded person. But I'm just saying that even just relatively benign stuff, right, can be a problem. There were recent stories about people who had joined, for example, a GLBT group on their campus and were just following the page or whatever. But then, it was a choir, right, that they were part of, a singing group. There was a GLBT singing group. And their choir leader just started posting things about, oh, we're doing this, we're doing that. And with that came all these tentacle-connected bits of information that then were suddenly on a public news feed, formerly Wall, who knows what the hell these things are anymore. And that people started seeing, and so this person's parents somehow saw it, and were like, wait, do you have something to tell us? And they were really angry, it was really bad. I mean, things like that are happening all the time, because we're not taking seriously what these structures are in people's lives, right? So yeah, you are all these things, and it used to be you could be all these things in all these different ways, and now they're being conflated. Context is collapsing. Okay, who had the Etch-A-Sketch? Anybody who's here today? Nope. Okay, I'll read it out. A quote, it says, "It just shows how semantic information can range from the simply intrinsic physical to the highly abstract semantic." And then the question was, where did shake to undo come from? Does it make sense? How does the user learn to do this? So first of all, raise your hand if you don't know what they're talking about shake to undo. A few of you. Okay, I don't blame you. The only reason I know that on my iPhone that by default, if I shake it, it allows me to undo something is because I'm a very clumsy person. And I'm always tripping or demonstrative. And then I look down, like, undo typing? What? And I finally put it together, because I'm slow, that, I shook it and it's an undo function. Because then I realized, well, yeah, there's no Control Z or whatever on my keyboard. How else am I supposed to undo something? Yeah?
So I have an Android, and I think it's interesting if you shake an Android, it brings up a report error thing because it thinks I'm frustrated. So sometimes when I'm doing something,
that's awesome.
You seem to be having a problem. So I have no idea iPhones undo something.
So, and that's real. And the thing is, that's so sweet of Android, but somehow equally wrong, right? Because it's assuming a thing that, like, I don't want to keep seeing that, right?
It never happened when I was actually having problems.
There you go. So that's a thing where we've taught a device to interpret a certain kind of, because on paper that sounds great. On paper, put that on a story card on an agile design team, whip that fucker down, oh yeah, people are gonna love this. We're thinking about the user, man. And how often is that actually right? Probably almost never, you know? And why you, Android? You know, people don't actually do that. When something's going wrong, you're probably more in a fit of like being still and like, oh, wait, what's going on? What's going on? By the time you're throwing it across the room, you don't really give a shit what it has to say to you. So anyway, so like these are ways in which we translate, we assume so many things and we build them into these pieces of the environment. And this word environment comes up over and over again, in part because these are now parts of our environment. We've gone very quickly in this class of thing we make, this digitally infused things, objects. We've gone very quickly from them being in rarefied, very specifically controlled environments, and there being very few of them, to them being ubiquitous and everywhere. And we have to deal with them to do anything. I just want to do a simple thing, and I have to figure out which button to push for this. So anyway, so now there's also language. There's a language thing here, right? This device, there's this idea in the book called Umwelt that comes from another ethnobiologist or something, I forget what it's called. Umwelt meaning it's the way that an organism perceives the world. Basically, it's the way it constructs what the world is, based on the limits or constraints of its perceptual system. One creature sees and experiences the world very differently than another creature because there are different things that matter to it. And there are other things that it doesn't care about. A medium that will give one creature a medium to live in will kill another creature, right? So I'll drown in water, a fish is fine. And so we perceive the world differently. So even among people, we perceive the world somewhat differently if we stretch that idea some. But these devices perceive us. We've built a perception mechanism into a phone where if it is shaken, or if it's whatever servos or whatever the hell those things are, it's the little things in there that know. You can tell how totally technically literate I am. However it knows, it's moving back and forth in some rapid way. That's a perception. That's a perceptual system, and we have to teach it what that means. And then the human has to understand how to tell it a thing, right? So it's an interesting conundrum in terms of like, how do I tell this machine and how is it reading what I'm telling it? And then from one environment to the next. So I shake one tree branch, it means the same thing to that tree branch as I'll pick up another tree branch. Look, it means the same damn thing to this tree branch, right? I sit in that chair perceives, if it had perception in this sense, it responds, the covalent, the mutual relationship between my ass and that chair is basically the same as my ass and this stool. This phone and this phone, totally different. That doesn't exist in the world we evolved in. Only in this stuff that we're making. Context can be that different.
Being very structured in organizations, and it's more of tacit now. And then you talk about social spaces. So this picture basically depicts Facebook and like users' connections on Facebook throughout the world. And what you earlier touched upon, how there's no more boundaries in context. And so that's basically what I got from that.
Okay, cool. You know, if this were an MRI, this would be known as metastatic disease. Sorry. See, I just love beating up on Facebook. It's so great. This is the world, which, by the way, just how you frame the world is a really interesting bit of contextual semantics, right? Have you seen the new show that has taken the Colbert Show place? And they've got an inverted, differently proportioned, I forget what it's called, inverted Mercator or something, map of the world behind him. Anyway, check that out, it's fun. It's just as legitimate, but who says one thing is up and one thing is down, right? North could be pointed at whatever. Anyway, but yeah, so this idea that that these places are all connected in these ways that change the manner of what that place is. And some of the stuff we were just talking about. And the digital technology is turning the sorts of rules and maps we find in like something like a tabletop game into these actively inhabited virtual places, as well as radically transformed digital ones. So like I was saying before, there's a system of rules at work in what happens when I shake my phone. There's a rule that was instantiated as code that tells the phone, in response to this in your environment, do this. And that is a map, in a sense, that translates the world for that phone. Just like we have things that tell us, like we've been taught when a traffic light turns red, we're supposed to stop. When it turns yellow, we're supposed to be careful because it might turn red or go really fast. And if it's green, you can go. In another instance, a red light means something completely different. In one interface, a grayed out button means it's inactive, but we still want you to know the button exists because sometimes it's active, so we don't want to just take it away. Or in OS 10 Yosemite, it just means this is a button you can click, because even though it's grayed out and it looks like you shouldn't be able to, but that's a peeve. So the thing is, we can make up the rules. We can make them up however we want, and so we're living in multiple places and one places all at the same time. Who had this? This was fun. Yep, tell us about it.
My section was about labels, and the day I read my section, I was on Reddit and saw this cartoon, and it was just perfect timing, basically. The idea of labels and where there's no context. This is a pretty simple cartoon as to where you walked up, but girlies drink. To me, I also prefer whiskey to
a girly drink.
A girly drink. So
yeah.
The definition of what is girly, and then what one person says doesn't necessarily mean what another person. So like if you go to a website and you would never, I was thinking of websites and how they would label a drink or how they would label it, and you can't really say a girly drink because you don't know the context of the person who's coming, what a girly drink could possibly mean.
Very true.
And some context to this cartoon is I found it on Reddit subreddit Troll X Chromosome, which I also like because.
Tell us about Troll X Chromosome. I love Reddit, and I don't spend nearly enough time on Reddit. Reddit's fascinating. It took me too long to even really discover and dig into Reddit, but yeah.
Troll X Chromosome is just basically because it's a site for women to post ragey not just comics, GIFs.
When I'm in front of the room, it's GIFs.
Yeah,
let's just put that out there.
GIFs as well.
It's fine. You can say what you want in private. I don't really give a shit.
But it was recommended to me because basically I said that the typical, I think it's X chromosome site, can sometimes get a lot of angry people coming there and attacking the posters. Well, Troll X is basically a place for women to come and make jokes and kind of troll themselves.
Yeah. That's fun. So that's a lovely context to have found that in. It's a lovely bit of a little cultural structure that wouldn't have existed probably without this architectural framework like Reddit with the rules and systems that Reddit is, that makes it a very different thing than other social platforms, right? If you experience enough of these, there are these interesting differences in the rule structures that makes them fundamentally different places where different things emerge. And that's an interesting thing that emerges. And there's a whole Reddit culture. There are multiple Reddit cultures. And this is located within a culture of gender, a conversation about gender, which I think is currently being actively deconstructed by what I think is kind of primarily the generation in this room. And it's awesome. My daughter is 19, just turned 19 Sunday. She's on Tumblr. That's her drug of choice, internet-wise. And she is all up in arms about gender, especially in games and things like that. And she celebrates it when there's a transgender character in something, or that there's a character that could be either, right? She loved the fact that there's some book about Adventure Time where BMO, the little machine It's got kind of a personality, you know, a little BMO. You guys seen Adventure Time? You have to, okay, homework. Adventure Time. BMO is this little thing that looks like a little old 1984 Macintosh, kind of.
Or a Game Boy.
Mixed with a Game Boy. Yeah, it's sort of like a mixture of those. And it's like BMO is a boy except when it's a girl. And she was like, that's so great. This idea that the gender norms are kind of people, or they're being called into question, and it's like, you know, this is why is it this way? Why does it have to be this way? Why is a girly drink a girly drink? Doesn't make sense. It may, you know, Sex and the City at one point looked so progressive, and now it just looks so like old and crusty, because it's kind of like gender it was sort of the last vestige of a certain perception of gender, and now it's kind of like, fuck you, pal, give me the whiskey, the really good stuff. But the label is central here, right? There's this semantic label that in just conversation it's becoming complex when it gets called out. But in general conversation, it's not something you're having to really make a hard decision about. Again, unless you're in a circle where people are kind of calling you out on, hey, what do you mean girly drink? But if you're going to build a structure where people are looking at drinks or clothes or something else, suddenly now you have to decide, is that an explicit piece of environment? Do we reify that as a structure? Do I decide that that's architecture or not? Right? And do I do it in a region? Do I read your IP address? And if you're in the southeast, I'll say girly drink, but somewhere else I won't. If you're in Portland, I would not dare. Right? I've been in these conversations. That's a slight exaggeration, but it's not much of one. Okay, who's got this? Yes, tell us about this.
So the section I was reading was about variant modes in digital places, and it was talking about how layout is kind of a placeholder for a place.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I don't like using the same word.
Language.
It's hard. And so you were talking about Google Shopping, and there was something about, you know, the products that are being shown are being advertised, and so it's a lie.
I don't know if I said that. I may have. I don't remember what I said.
Oh, you didn't say that part. That was.
No, that's fine. That's fine. I kind of said that.
And so I was like, oh, really? I have to try this and find this button because that's what I do. And what I realized, on top of, yes, that button does exist, was also that they changed their menu bar. And so shopping goes from being like a little ways down after images and maps to being the second thing that's there. I think it was just after searching, that all suddenly, I was just confused. I didn't like it.
So let me make sure I understand. So in the top right, that's a screenshot of what Google looks like after you've gone to the shopping area. You've gone back to web, and now shopping is the second tab as opposed to further down? They changed the order of the tabs because you went to shopping?
I search for salad tongs, and I see web. The second tab is shopping.
It's images, maps, then shopping.
So as soon as I search for salad tongs, I see what is on the left. No, that's my right. The right-hand side. And then when I click shopping, all of a sudden shopping is like further down the list.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's the other way around. Yeah.
It doesn't really make sense to me. I don't understand why they would make that decision.
Google's doing a lot of things like that. So this is an example, I think, of what people are experimenting with, trying to be contextually relevant. I think what they're doing, even though this sounds like it happened in the opposite of what I would expect, I've been noticing that Google's tabs up there, that their things are change order for me all the time, and I'll use muscle memory to kind of go up there and try to click a thing and then realize, oh no, that's not the thing I thought it was. It used to be it was always web and then images, and so I'll go up and try to click images because I want to find an image, and then before I know it, I'm clicking something else, news or something, and it's like, I don't want the news, I want the images. So, you know, I think that they're starting to try to reorder the menu sometimes based on what they think you need or what's more important to you. I know that, for example, in Google Maps, which I use on my phone to get around, they do this thing that they think is really helpful, but that I find it incredibly annoying, which is they change the scale based on your speed. Anybody notice this? So if I'm on a freeway going 70 miles an hour, I've got a bigger scale because there's more room between me and maybe like an exit. But then when I get onto the surface streets, it changes. But it's not just like two things. It's like I don't know how it's working, because there are times when I'm looking at the thing and it looks like the thing I need to turn on is coming right up, and I turn to make the wrong turn because the scale changed. Can you just be consistent? Like because my cognition is trying to make a match between this scale and that scale, and I'm trying to learn that. And if you change the invariant quality of that, it might do more harm than good. Anyway, in this case, you've got a place where Google has built a reputation as being, look, we're all about what our algorithm judges as the best content for whatever context you give us. We're going to go find what we have scoured from the whole universe of web to get what we think is most relevant to that, based on certain qualities. And they have principles, they have decisions, they have preferences built into that algorithm, which by and large, I think, align with kind of what a lot of us would think of as what's best in terms of judging the information, by and large. Who knows exactly, because the algorithm isn't exactly open source. But they're pretty transparent about a lot of that stuff. And when they make a big change, they're pretty transparent about making that change. Anyway, so the point being that Google sort of built its reputation on being fairly neutral in terms of like, we're not just going to dump random shit at you, but we're going to dump what seems to be best in terms of like what truly we think is probably the best information. And then SEO people try to trick it into thinking that their information is better. And the battle continues. Then you go to shopping, and there's a whole different cosmology. Like there's a whole different, like it's really about who paid us to get their stuff over the top, right? But it looks the same, by and large, right? It's like I've walked into a hospital that is here to help me and treat me and make me better. And then I walk into another building that looks just like a hospital, but they're selling me whatever snake oil they're going to get the biggest profit from. Now, what? Right? Not that different from direct mail. Like you guys by now probably get direct mail stuff where it looks like something from the government. Oh, I better open this, and you start to realize, oh no, this is not from the government. They're trying to sell me a credit card. These bits of sleight of hand. So this is the chink in the armor. Like I was like, come on, Google, what's up? What's up with that? It just doesn't seem quite right. They probably weren't thinking of it that way. I seriously doubt anybody in Google was going, let's trick people into thinking that this is like legit, like the web has somehow voted on these being the best products and the best deals, But I think that's how a lot of people take it. I think that they conveniently didn't talk about it. That's my generous assumption about the little meetings that might have gone on at Google. Who had this? I had to put the Harry Potter one in here. If all of you had done Harry Potter references, we'd be here to show every single example. Yeah.
So my part talked about the mapping, like how Yelp changes the mappings of the restaurants based on your location, and in general how like mapping is incorporated into games to provide a sense of direction, and it acts as a sextant now. So I mean, this is the first thing that I thought of, like when I thought about mapping, so I chose Marauders.
No, that's great. So now this is the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, it's a very Harry Potter-esque aesthetic map, but it's the Universal theme park, I guess, right? Which I haven't gotten to see yet. I'm kind of sad about that. And what it reminded me of was the Marauders Map. So who are the Harry Potter heads that know what a Marauders Map is? Tell us what a Marauders Map is.
Me?
Yeah.
The Marauders Map, it's I think in the third book of Harry Potter, and it's this map that shows everybody at Hogwarts, their names, what they're doing, and it shows their position regardless of like spells or enchantments they've had on. Yeah. Okay,
so everybody heard that? So you open the map. What do you have to say to open the map?
I solemnly swear that I want to know.
Straight A's.
Yeah.
Just give her an A right now.
We actually have a copy of it here at the special library.
You do?
At the Clark Library. In our map library.
It doesn't work.
But yeah, it unfolds
Right.
like a million times and it's beautiful and everybody should go and see it.
That's wonderful. I'd love to see that. So I love the Marauders Map in part because I was kind of deep in kind of rediscovering muds and mushes around the time that I read that in that book. And a mud or a mush, you can just do /who, and it just tells you where everybody is. And in some of them, they even have like a map. If it's but a lot of them are just too messy to even map. Plus, they can change overnight, right? The admin decides this is going to go over here, and suddenly the map is wrong. But you do that, it's like this person's in this room, this person's in this room, this is, and it just reminded me of like, I was like, well, this is coming, right? I mean, we're going to know where everybody is if they've opted in, hopefully. And now you've got Find Your Friends and things like that, where I can just bring up a map, and if you all opted in and you all were on there, I could just see all of you walking around campus, a little Marauders Map, no invocation necessary, which is a shame. This happened overnight. This went from a fantastic idea, right, that would only happen in a magical world to everyday technology. It still floors me. Like I still remember back in my early, computing technology fetishizing days when I would want this. Oh, there's a new Apple computer out. I really want that. And I would read all about it and everything. And I also read things like the Wired, when Wired magazine was still Wired magazine, but I mean they would always have the techno fetish kind of area where it's like these really cool, sleek new devices that you could never afford. Then the iPhone comes out, and the iPhone is like, well, the first one was pretty expensive, sure, with the pilot, but then within a year it was basically the price has been, a year or two, the price has been all along, a couple $100 plus a contract, and you get what. It used to be that that would be the thing that millionaires would buy. Like that's the device, that's the phone that a millionaire could afford to buy, right? That's the diamond-crusted Ferrari of phones. And I could only sort of lust after it. Apple turned the best object into a democratized piece of everyday technology. It's pretty phenomenal what happened there. That it has that kind of power that now is just so ubiquitous. Now I'm not saying Apple's best. You know what I mean though, at the time it was like, oh no, that's another plane. That's another plane of excellence of design and manufacture from everything else that calls itself a phone. Now other stuff has caught up and even exceeded it in many ways. But this idea that we now have a Marauders Map anywhere we go is a fundamental change that if we just stand back and look at it, it kind of hurts. It's such vertigo to realize how fast that happened, so we don't even really think about it. It's easier just to go about our day and just use it. There's a couple more, but I think we need to stop.
Break?
I think let's have a break. Thank you. Those were wonderful. I hope that my pattering on about your selections was in some way enlightening or helpful. And let's
take a 15-minute break, come back on the big hands on the 9th.
So fancy. Welcome back from your break. So you had an exercise that your dear professor and I cobbled together over a Skype session or Google Hangout the other day. So you're kind of being a guinea pigged on a kind of an exercise I'm trying to do in some workshops that are coming up, where I want people to go into an environment and look at it through the lenses of physical, semantic, and digital information, and analyzing like how do those different modes of information, where are they in the environment, and how are they influencing one another, and how are they influencing your perception and understanding of that part of the environment. So whether it's a Starbucks or a this or a that, right? So you guys aren't going to walk out today and do that. You've already gone out and looked at some environments. You've looked at some buildings and things that Dan asked you to look at. So what we asked you to do was to analyze. So I'm going to go over this real quick, even though
only the leaders have seen the prep guide. So
only the leaders have seen it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you're going to find this out from your group leaders, and basically what they're going to do is talk you through just some quick statements on what these modes are within different kind of layers or parts or perspectives of the things that you went to go see. So I know most of you, or hardly any of you, or none of you, actually read the whole book, and I understand it's a long book, and you have a lot of things to read. So you all, I know, read your part and some things around it. I'm hoping that today intrigues you enough to where you're like, I might just read some more of this thing. But the key principles that you're going to be looking at right now are these three modes of information that kind of form the kind of guts of the book, the system that it's teaching you to think through. Physical information is the perception of the environment, right? So it's surfaces, mediums like the air, like just how are things put together. So the things that we looked at in the slides where you had the Frank Lloyd Wright house, where you had the cobblestones, things like that, you have surfaces joined together and that those create structures that make objects that are attached or detached, that are things you can walk on, things you can lean against, things that you can move around. That's the world we live in, and it's made of all these things nested within one another. All creatures, all animal life understands the world this way in some fashion, because that's the way that mutual relationship between body and environment works. Okay. Semantic information is people communicating with people. So anybody who has ever been in or will take like a linguistics class will find out that it's more complicated than this, just like anybody who studies cognitive psychology or ecological psychology will know this is more complicated than this. But in the book, I'm talking about language with a very broad brush. Anything that can be thought of as linguistic, iconography, pictures, words, verbal speech, the buzz sound that a red light makes so that visually impaired folks know that it's time to cross the street. All those things are language. The line in the road that tells you to stay on one side or the other, language. There's a physical layer of paint on the ground, on the asphalt. There's physical information there, but it has meaning beyond what it is. So physically, it's just something I can step on, right? It's no different from what's around it. Physically, it affords me nothing other than just being a flat something. But semantically, it means you stay on this side of the road, you stay on this side of the road. Language is like that too, where these sounds I'm making are just sounds. There's no intrinsic meaning to these sounds. These sounds are gobbledygook nonsense to someone who doesn't speak English. But because you've learned that these affordances of vibrating the air in a certain way, right, what that does is it affords making a noise that you can hear. But beyond that, that affordance then can be interpreted as some kind of conventional meaning, semantic meaning, that goes beyond just the physicality of it. Being able to see the world and separate those things out is something that the users of things we make don't do and shouldn't have to do. That's why we have to do them. When you're watching a film and there's an establishing shot, and then there's a shot that has one angle with one person talking and another angle with somebody else talking. So there's an establishing shot of the information science building, and there's an establishing shot of the classroom, and there's an establishing shot of these nice people here. And then one shot shows him looking this way, talking to her. Another shot shows her looking this way, talking to him. There's decisions the director is making and the cinematographer are making so that the nestedness of that makes sense to you. Early filmmakers had to learn this. What happened was they would make films where they showed him talking from over here, and they put a camera over here because her better side is here, and they'd show her talking. They're both talking. Then they both look like they're talking to somebody else that we can't see, right? Because of the way the shot is framed. The viewer of the film isn't having to think about that. For your average film goer, you try to point these things out, and they're like, "What are you talking about? It's just a movie." I don't see that. The filmmaker had to think about that so that you didn't have to. Designers have to think about these layers of the environment so you don't have to. So you have to be able to take things apart semantically and semiotically to understand what they're doing. So think about what was the language in the environment around the environment you went to, and what was it doing? In the pictures you made, find things that are acting semantically. Sometimes the semantics is you've got a big pointy jaggedy building or something like that. There's a semantic. the physical affordances, well, if I was a giant and I fell on it, I would get stabbed, you know. I don't know what the hell the affordance is, right? There's no physical, really, necessity even in it, maybe. But there's a semantic something. There's culturally some kind of resonance going on there. What is it speaking to? What does it mean?
Andrew, would you say that this building being a bookend to the School of Public Policy or whatever it is, it looking the way that it does, is that part of the semantic environment of this place?
So yeah, my first thought, being completely ignorant basically about architecture in general, other than the little bits I had to pick up for this, I would guess that somebody who's Umwelt, the way that they perceive the world is as an architect of campuses, who is used to looking at them in terms of models, sees a certain symmetry that they feel is necessary there. And perhaps they're also saying, it's a lot easier just to fucking carbon copy this thing and put it over here, right? That looks good, right?
But that planner wanting to bookend where the campus is, that's a semantic layer.
That's what I'm saying, is that it's about, because if you're walking in, what I'm getting at is if you're walking in the campus, you don't see bookends for shit. You don't care. You just, I'm in these buildings, now I go to these buildings, I go to these. Now, being able to wayfind your way through all that and have that make some kind of sense is fine, but that's not helping anybody wayfind their way into campus. No, that's a top-down, cultural, kind of God's eye view assumption that bookending this environment has some kind of meaning, that it's important. Mm-hmm. But it was probably only important in a very small group of people. The vast majority of people, way vast, 99% of the people don't care. But they do care that when they get in here, it doesn't make any sense, right? Anyway, but so those semantic decisions can go into lots of things. So, and we have the same problem in software. We have people making decisions in boardrooms that structure environments in ways that make sense to their ideology, their sense of orthodoxy, but that doesn't actually create an environment that adds value to the way people have to use it. So then we have digital. So digital information. So my guess is the places you went to may not even have Wi-Fi, for goodness sakes. Like, these places you went to didn't have big digital displays on them. They weren't, Blade Runner-esque, cyber places. But think about what you did to get there. Think about what you did to record it. Think about what you did to understand where it was in relation to other things. What was it to you before you got there? Unless you're just a really, rarefied, hipstery kind of analog person who just, I'm not going to use a digital map. I'm just going to pull out my old atlas and find this thing. Your first experience of this was pictures on a computer and maps on a computer. That was part of the context of what this was to you. Just like this class was possibly part of, I'm giving away some of the way I want you to think about this, but part of the context of you. What was the context of it to you? And I want you to widen your aperture to include all that stuff, right? So not just the thing itself, not just the reified thing that acts as if I have a boundary, you can stop thinking about me once you get past my walls or past my city block. But what does it mean culturally? Where does it sit in history? Where does it sit? What kind of conversation is it a part of? I mean, Dan, I was already told you, to look at those kinds of things, right? How is this a reflection of a Corbusier or whatever, right? There's a conversation going on. What kind of conversation is a part of? So really, the sky's the limit, all this stuff. But I just want you, and you'll see, you've got a grid to work with. But I have this up here as a reminder. So I had these pictures just as one example. City Lights Bookstore is something I come back to a lot. This is San Francisco, where I encountered this stairwell, where if you ignore the sign on there, there's affordances, there's physical information in this, the way the surfaces of the stairs are made. My body can mutually joins with this environment to go up in space, right? The terrestrial being with legs, I could walk up its size just right. If the stairs were this high, I couldn't do it. And I don't have to think about that. Once I've experienced what it's like to go upstairs, there's not a whole lot of thinking. No, there's not a logic involved. I'm not processing something. My body is just falling upward, basically. But I don't know what's up there. I need the semantic information to tell me what's up there. And I don't know what poetry room, I don't know what those marks mean unless I'm part of some kind of cultural convention where I understand that these marks are code for something that sounds like poetry room, and that in English that might mean something having to do with a room that these stairs are going to that has something to do with poetry, and it's a bookstore, so there's probably books of poetry in there. Think of all the physical stuff that we can take for granted here in a bookstore that we can't take for granted on something like the web, right? We have to use language to give us all the structural context. We're relying only on the labels, only on these very abstract shapes to kind of break it up and nest it for us. And then think about here how City Lights Bookstore, the store, is part of this environment, this Google Maps environment in a way, different facets of what it is, representations of what it is, in a way that being there, of course this is not a pipe, right? This is not a bookstore, it's a picture of a bookstore. But it's representing the fact that I stood in front of a bookstore and took a picture of it. Being there physically is not. But it's trying to take a lot of the pieces of environmental information to kind of construct that for you. So, and even this is full of all kinds of mixtures of these things. So, okay, so that's just one example, but none of you went there, so that's not going to spoil anything. Yeah?
You mentioned that we use language to define the structure in digital information spaces. When you say language, is it only words?
No. So, yeah, so when I say language, I'm meaning very broadly people communicating with people. So semantic information, the way I put it, I'm trying to simplify it. So again, if you walk into a linguistics class, you're going to be like, oh, no, that's too broad of a term. It's more specific than that. But for our purposes, language, semantic information is language. And anything that is humans communicating with humans, whether it's a gesture or a picture or a pictograph or a Chinese symbol or kanji or something like that. I mean, all these things, because really it's hard to draw, honestly, a line between them. Anything that functions as representing something that its physicality isn't all by itself is essentially a kind of language. So a button functions in a very linguistic way, right? Because I've learned that the button is something that I can, usually it looks like a button, it looks like it's in a recessed something, and there's an object that I can push, and what I've learned growing up is that when I do that, it usually just pops right back out, it springs. But I don't know anything else. It signifies to me that, that I'm the kind of thing that can do that. Now, of course, it could be like Bugs Bunny or Roadrunner painting a cave or a tunnel on a mountainside, and then I run right into it, right? So it could be a fake button that doesn't do anything. It could be a button that squishes in and out that I think changes the walk signal, but it actually doesn't. It's just a placebo. There are plenty of those, apparently, and city planners use them. So who knows what the hell the button does? I have to learn that either by pushing it, trial and error, and seeing, does something happen? A lot of video games that do that. You have to push a button and listen. Did something change? Oh, I think, that door opened. Oh, I have to get in there and kill the monster and then get the treasure. So you have to either do that, or has to be a label that says, this button makes the elevator go up. Or somebody has to tell me. So we rely on semantic information for a lot of these mechanisms in our lives too. But even in a building like this, there's nothing, when you manufacture buildings like this, you're repeating surfaces and planes and their relationships in ways that doesn't really exist in nature. So all hallways look the same, unless you've got something that differentiates them. You start relying on semantic information a lot in order to differentiate. Is this just another hallway, or is this the hallway to the lab? So think very broadly about how language is functioning. Yeah.
Just an extension to that would be like, how would you consider street view, or maybe going virtual reality of how immersive the experience is for the physical world itself, conveyed through digital platform?
I forgot how to drink water for a second. I'm sorry, did you say that again? Because I was busy trying to breathe. Go ahead. No reflection on you. You're fine.
So I'm just curious, like, how does language being as a medium for digital world correlates to something like Street View or virtual reality, which in a way tries to mimic the physical way of interaction with the real world?
Yeah. So the question was, how does something like Street View and virtual reality relate to, has something like Street View, like this, here, relate to something like virtual reality?
I'm saying, how does that differ from language being the only medium for digital? So you said language is the only medium for digital, but as it doesn't have the affordance to convey the physical way it's being recorded.
Oh.
But now we can use virtual reality in a way to show that physical interaction.
Yeah, no, I don't know that, well, it's a complicated, yeah. So one of the distinctions I try to make in the book, which was hard won, it was hard for me to get to this. So let's say you're playing Doom or Quake, these are old school, or I don't care, Halo, whatever, but you're in one of these first-person shooter games, or you're wearing your Oculus Rift, and you're like, in this immersive virtual reality experience. And a three-dimensional environment is being projected in front of you. But it is a simulated environment. In my system, what that is, it's language that is simulating physical information. Okay? It's a picture. It's not real. So I've got that picture of the Magritte pipe that says, "This is not a pipe." You familiar with the "This is not a pipe"? It's on page. All of you brought your books, right? Or all of you have your computers out. Look up "This is not a pipe," and on image search, and one of them is going to be a painting of a pipe, and in French it's going to say "This is not a pipe," but whatever the French is for that I can't actually pronounce, as I'm not that cool.
Page 218.
Here you go. So this is a favorite artifact of semioticians to talk about meaning. And it's called, the name of the painting actually kind of gives away what it's kind of about, which is the treachery of images, right?
Yeah.
So basically, the way we and Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein talks about a very similar thing, about the rabbit duck. So the thing, have you ever seen the thing that's on page blah, blah, blah? This is the animal I wanted on the front of the book, by the way, and I kept trying. It's an etching and everything. It's like, nah. Nobody said no, which really bugged me. Nobody just said, "No, Andrew, we're not going to do that." There was just like, that would be a part of the email that it would just not get answered. You guys, you're missing such a great opportunity. Anyway, so the duck rabbit that looks like it's just the head of an animal. It's like, could it be a duck? Could it be a rabbit? But if you put that against a bunch of rabbits that look like rabbits, that are rabbits, like whole rabbits, it's like, oh yes, that's a rabbit. Anyway, put it against a bunch of ducks, oh, it's a duck. Context. But if you, the thing is that we look at that and we say, oh, that's a rabbit. Is it a rabbit or is it a duck? Well, it's neither. It's a frickin' scribble, right? That sort of looks like the shape of some platonic form of something that we interpret as rabbit head or duck head. Doesn't even necessarily look like any specific species either. It's like a smiley face, looks like a person, right? It's a weird thing. So these environments, if you play Doom, I remember the first time I played Doom, and I was playing it in a dark room with speakers. And it freaked me out because the sound design in it is amazing, even where the graphics are pretty clunky by today's standards. But if you look at that, all it is just very plain surfaces. It's what a smiley face is to like a portrait, a photorealistic portrait. Doom is to like actually walking around in some kind of demon-ridden dungeon, I guess. Because it's just very basic surfaces and planes. But it's convincing because it simulates just well enough, right, to feel like I'm in space. Well, the graphics have gotten more complex now, and they're more convincing. My dogs will bark at things that, are on our big screen TV or 50-inch TV, because they don't know. And I will jump back, like, oh shit, that thing almost got me, right? I used to do that in Doom too, for that matter. But, okay, so I still think of that as language. I still think of it as what Gibson calls display. It's just that it's gotten more sophisticated where it is, but it's still a simulation in the same way that a button on a screen is simulating a physical button that actually pushes into a surface. And this is a really, I mean, we could go another week on this because this is at the heart of this simulated physical information thing is at the heart of what it means now to have a computing device that I left over here that we all walk around with. This affords nothing but tapping and making this sound or maybe resting a coffee mug on it so it won't stain my table. I mean, you know, like this there's no affordance. We didn't get into affordance, but affordance, the way that I'm positioning it here, is much more like Gibson means it and the way Norman means it. And although Norman has come back to mean it more like this, so that's the other thing. But the physical information here is there's nothing. But this is a mode-driven device, meaning it can be almost anything by what it simulates here. Right? So it can simulate all this information. It can simulate physical things like buttons or whatever. And the way that it simulates them can go from the sort of highly what they call skeuomorphic to where it's like, well, it's imitating physical stuff so that we kind of know how it should function, to very abstracted where it's just a label that says save. And because of where it's positioned, I could be reading a text that has the word save in it. I could be reading a story where it says, oh, the prince said, I will save you. I'm not going to tap that and think I'm going to save the document, right? I know better because of the context of where the word is. It could be in the same typeface and up in the top corner, and because it's an app where I can save things, oh yeah, that must be the thing that I saved the thing with. So this issue of like how surfaces are simulated is not that it's just a continuum between that kind of Second Life. Virtual reality kind of simulation of physical affordances, all the way to how we make just very simple interfaces and what they do. And is it, can I swipe this or can I not swipe this? I don't know. It changes with every app. And what that swipe means is different in every single one. So that was a long answer. But I've also got a point in the book where I talk about how Second Life, I feel like, was like training wheels for this new world that we're making for ourselves, where the semantic information in it is actually more important to us than the physical information in many ways. Physical information is important. I mean, otherwise we'd fall through the bottom of the earth and, chaos ensues and hijinks. But in terms of why I would want to go to this bar versus this bar, I'm checking this, right? I want to know, well, where's everybody else going tonight, right? So this idea that like everybody always goes to the same place all the time, because how else am I going to know? We just all have to kind of collectively somehow emergently agree that this is kind of where we end up, or this is just the bar I was at when I found the social circle I hang with at night, or I just happen to be in this dorm, right? So that's the dorm I'm in, and so these are the people that I live with. But now I can be a part of however many different groups. It can be 40 different Google groups on campus that I'm a part of, and now the anime club. There's only one other person into anime in this whole building, but we all get together all the time over here. But that shut down tonight, now let's go over here, right? So that semantic information is becoming a bigger part of guiding where our bodies go and what matters to us. And there's a thing in there about how Yelp has changed the way we eat out, because now it's not unknown anymore if I go to this weird little funky restaurant. Like, it's not just a place that I'd had to have gone to before or know somebody who went to. I can just check and find out all this information about it and go and feel like, oh, it'll be okay to go spend some money there. Whereas the chain restaurants, that's what they counted on, was when you don't know where else to go, you at least know what you're getting when you come here. No matter how rubbery and mediocre it is, you at least know what you're getting into. They can't count on that anymore. So their business is going down where Yelp is, and the mom and pop place's business is going up. So that's all virtual information. So what I'm trying to get at is that this idea of virtual reality, it's still language. It's just a different part of the continuum. But in terms of our perception and our lives, we take it all in all at once, and we just use it however we use it. That makes any sense. Okay. So it is bleeding out. So now, like, we're all walking around in a doom dungeon, right? We're all walking around in mud. We're all walking around in the Marauders Map. We're all now part of this physical/digital world where I'm not just in a place like this, I'm also in this place. Okay, I'm sorry, that went on way too long, and now you're not going to have any time to do your exercise.
No, they will.
Okay, any other questions about any of this? Yeah?
I was wondering if, like, going off of that, then how would you position, like, Gestalt principles or other, like, basic level perceptual guiding things, like, you know, when we encounter them in a physical environment versus, like, if a designer is using them, like, on an interface, like, in that case, does their utilization turn into semantic information instead of physical information?
Well, so first of all semantic information has some physicality, or else we wouldn't be able to perceive it. So the difference is that the way what makes something work, one of the things that makes a linguistic act symbolic is that it means something other than what it intrinsically is. So if I put up my middle finger to you on the street, it's not just a middle finger, right? I mean, middle finger, it's just a finger that can pick things up, it can poke things, it helps me grab my spoon. But there's this extra meaning to it now, this gesture, that in another culture is innocuous. The same goes with like shapes. Like the swastika was a symbol of luck and fortune and other kinds of things, depending on the culture you're looking at, for a long time. But, the Nazi propaganda machine is pretty effective and changed the meaning of that symbol. And nobody really thinks of it that way so much anymore, even though you can drive through Amish country and see it on the sides of barns. It doesn't mean that there's Nazi fascist cells there. It just means that they're separate enough from Western society that they still think of it as, screw you guys. Not that they would say that necessarily, but maybe during Rumspringa. But they, screw you guys. We still think it's a good symbol. Okay, so that's the difference. The thing is, the Gestalt, and J.J. Gibson actually was studied under Gestalt people for a while, and ended up essentially not rejecting it, but thinking he was just sort of moving beyond it, because his whole idea of affordance was actually kind of an answer to that. He said the Gestalt scientists were pointing out these behaviors that we seem to have, but they didn't really have an answer for why they were the way they were. And what he was saying is, I'm going to get to the bottom of actually why it is that we pick up information this way, is the way he put it. So in a way, Gestalt is an interesting path. It's a little branch. I mean, a number of people were like, how can you write about context and not have a whole chapter about Gestalt psychology? Well, because embodied cognition. Because it just sort of like makes it not matter anymore. Because it ends up explaining it in a more straightforward and kind of concrete way that shows some principles about why it is that way, rather than, oh, look, when we put this shape in front of somebody, they interpret it this way. The other thing about a lot of the Gestalt style thinking is it's really wrapped up in how people interpret pictures of things as opposed to the things themselves. So a lot of cognitive psychology now, you'll see these papers coming out like crazy about, oh, we put pictures of blah blah bananas in front of people in a lab, and it made them think about yellow or something. I don't know. Or we put pictures of bananas in front of them, and so now we know that humans who encounter a banana tend to do X. It's like, well, that wasn't a banana. It was a picture of a banana. And it wasn't in a grocery store. It was in a lab. And these are different. Guess what? They are different. They really are, right? It's not, but if you're thinking representationally like, well, it's just a picture in your head anyway, then what's the difference? Well, no, that picture is language. A banana is a banana. And that's different. So, in my line of work, I don't trust card sorts so much because I think they're a very valuable tool in many ways. But you know what I mean when I say a card sort? You take your language, you put them in front of people, you let them sort it from the bottom up, or you let them label things on their own, or there are all these different ways you can do card sorts. Or you come up with categories, you say, you sort these into these top-down categories. I think they're useful, but I think they're useful, and I got into a debate, or not a conversation with Naomi about this at the office, and we're going to continue it later. Well, you'll hear more later. Because the thing is that, and I found this out working with Lowe's Home Improvement, that the schema we came up with, the taxonomy kind of schema we came up with for people to find like how-tos and tutorials and things about home improvement, it turned out that we kind of had to do sort of some top-down shaping of that worked better than what we would have done if we had just done card sorts and done what the card sorts reflected. And it's been a few years, so it's hard for me to remember exactly what the distinctions were, but I just know that when you put labels in front of people and you ask them to sort them, the context that you are learning about is how people sort labels when they're having to think explicitly about labels. When you go and you shop and you get groceries, are you thinking about the meaning of canned goods and where it should be? No. You're just trying to shop. You've got a lot of other crap on your mind. You're not in a quiet lab. You're not even paying attention to the language explicitly. You are tacitly just trying to wait, well, I don't know what your grocery store is, Meijer and another grocery store.
Kroger,
okay. Is Meijer the one that has the things with the things, or is it Kroger that has the things with the things, right? You're thinking about it that way just because you're just trying to get your shopping done, and it's loud, and you're tired, and you're hungry, and you're going to buy a lot of cereal and shit because you're hungry and you don't really eat in the house. I'm sorry, I'm getting way into my own life here, but there's an example in the book about being at a fast food menu in a drive-through, and the kind of like crazy acrobatics that go on cognitively, just trying to make a decision, looking at this horribly designed menu with this squawking voice and some asshole behind you who's like honking because you're taking too long with your order, and you're just like, screw it, just give me the number one, and you drive away with this like pile of grease, and you wanted the salad, but you couldn't figure out which salad, and you're on Weight Watchers, like, I've been on Weight Watchers, and it's like, what to do? And you know what I mean? Now, you take that menu and you put it in front of somebody in a lab, and they'll be like, oh no, yeah, that's cool, I like this good menu. You know, or here, where would you put the big double broiler and the backyard boss under, I put them under burgers. Awesome, now we know how to design our menu. It's meaningless information to me when I'm in a hurry and I'm like, what the fuck is a backyard boss? What does that have on it? It sounds mean. So like, we get a lot of bad design this way, right? By being in these rarefied places and giving people these tasks that aren't. So that's why I end up landing so heavily on ethnographic research, which hurts for me to say because I'm a lazy, introverted person, and I do not want to go and hang out with people in their offices or watch how they shop or whatever. Honestly, I really don't. I would rather just say, you know what, screw you guys. I'm going to come up with a thing and learn how to use it. But it turns out the best way to do this is to go and actually see people in the context that they do things and learn how to do that kind of ethnographic work and read between the lines, because that's how you really start. And the thing is, that person you're observing, they don't know. They couldn't tell you what the stuff you need to know. Some of it, yeah, some of it not, because they've reified, they've constructed their world in their head. The story they tell themselves about how their day goes is not the same as what they actually do. It's true of all of us. So, getting that is really crucial, I think, but almost nobody wants to pay to do it, and it's hard to do, and it's messy. It's not cut and dry. You don't come out with the best answer. You come out with good answers from doing that kind of work. It's really hard to pull out the statistically best thing. And the thing about statistically best is it's just a way to cover your ass, but it isn't necessarily best. So you could go and you can use TreeJack or one of these tools to say, oh, well, we put our taxonomy through and we did 500 people and it turns out that here's the bell curve, blah, blah, blah. And it could be honestly meaningless. But unless you A/B tested that against 10 or 12 other things in an actual fully designed environment, you're not going to know really which one is working better than another. Turns out you have to be a designer, and you have to make decisions based on experience about what structures you put in the world are going to work best in what situations. And it turns out some people are better at it than others, and it turns out that experience helps. And these other tools are not going to give you that answer, but they are excellent inputs. They're excellent data to give you context around making those decisions, right? It can help to narrow the field about which things to try. Yeah, so you got to just put up a hand to stop me because I just keep going. Go ahead.
Yeah, you kind of alluded to a point where you say like the data can be used as a way to protect yourself, I guess, against scrutiny if the decision goes wrong. Then how do you like make different decisions, right? Like, what's another way to like think about decision making?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of how deep I go on this. You know, if you look at a chart or a graph or some data from something, and this is a whole thing, a whole contextual conundrum that I, you know, again, it's one of those things I had to leave on the cutting room floor. A whole thing I started on this and had to leave it aside just before. It's already 450 pages, for God's sake. So I had to stop. But a big problem you're going to run into, or you may have already if you do this kind of work, is the data fetish, right? Like, we need data. Now, I'm not shooting down data. I think data is good. I think that a lot of times I've learned things looking at the data that my assumptions were thinking otherwise, right? Because they color my, you know, the iPad, for example. I never would have released an iPad as a product. I thought, who the hell wants one? We've already got really light laptops, and we've already got, you know, this other thing. Who's going to use this clunky ass kind of hybrid thing? It's sold like hotcakes. There's gobs of tablets. It's never going to go away. I learned, you know, if I looked at some data, the right data, I maybe would have had a different decision about what people actually wanted in the marketplace. So I don't know. So I think data can be really useful, but you have to put it in its place. And you have to always understand that where you see one answer in that data, somebody else sees something completely different, because there's really not a lot of context in it. A great example is you're looking at the analytics of a website, and you can see that people are spending 2 minutes average on this one page, and hardly anybody's visiting this other one. So if you're going to do a content inventory and get rid of content, what would you get rid of and what would you keep? The one people spend a lot of time on, you keep, and the one they never go to, you get rid of. Turns out people spend a lot of time on that page, though, because when you actually watch them working, they're on there just trying to figure it out because it's the one that smells the most like what they need, but it never actually has what they need. The one that that has what they need is the one nobody ever goes to, but nobody knows to get to it. And it turns out that people are just frustrated. And that's why they're still sitting there. It's sitting there for 2 minutes because half the people say, screw this. And the other half the people are leaving it sitting there for 5 minutes while they're getting up and screaming at nobody because I can't find what I need, right? You don't know what's going on behind all that. The data could mean anything. So there's lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? There's James Thurber quote that I love. There's no safety in numbers or in anything else. Data is just data. It's just an input. So what I always commend is you want as much different kinds of data as you can get. And in the real world, practically, you can only usually choose some over some. I would rather go and watch 5 people do things related to the problem somebody wants me to design, or the environment they want me to make, or the piece of an environment they want me to make. I'd rather watch only 5 people do that than have $1 million worth of analytics, if I had to choose. But if I don't have to choose, I want both, because they inform one another, right? Now, in terms of how you make decisions out of that, there's a whole bunch of other stuff you have to decide, because what that tells you about how you want to interpret that to use for one kind of a product can be totally different for some kind of like if you go to Flickr, if you poll people who use Flickr and you say, how easy is it to find that same photograph that you just saw a week ago? They would fail. It'd be like, it's really hard to find that same photograph I saw a week ago. The whole semantic world changes every day on Flickr. People are always tagging things. It's always moving around. As opposed to how hard it is to find the same photograph you saw a week ago on like a library's photography collection, because they've got all this metadata that's there that's specifically geared around finding a specific thing you need, right? But if you went and you said, oh, well, Flickr's failing, we have to change Flickr, you would gut Flickr, you kill what makes it valuable, because Flickr is actually more about sociality, it's about sharing and discovery. Like, I'm going to put in bird, I'm going to see a bunch of different birds, right? That's what I'm there for Flickr to do. But I know that if I see something that I want to make sure I'm going to remember, I'm going to star it. I'm going to look in my history or something like that. But it's not really geared toward that other task, right? So what that data is telling you is actually what's the purpose of the space? What is it for? You know, Dan may have already, or at some point we'll talk about the beach versus the town thing, right? This is the idea that if you build a beach house that's its primary purpose is to have this little deck on top, to have this gorgeous full view of the ocean, and you put that in the middle of Manhattan, between two giant buildings and a sewer grating, not successful, you know. And so analytics and all these other decisions get caught up into those decisions. What's the nature of it that we're trying to make? That's the other thing you have to decide. So all those contextual things change what those numbers mean. So this whole spiel has just been about treat them very carefully, right? Treat them very carefully. But there's no easy way to make any of these decisions. If you need to go get some numbers to back up your decision so that you can have something to point to, say, well, this is why I did it, to take some of the heat off, by all means do that. I mean, there's plenty of budget to get more numbers, almost always, if it's just numbers. CYA is, yeah, do it, but cover your ass. But don't, you know, but the culture is such that it tells us that's what you rely on and nothing else really matters. So it's frightening how many projects I encounter where they're like, well, we know what we need to know. Here's the analytics. Here's the metrics. So, well, what does this mean? You start digging in and you start realizing it's so weird. Like, there's like JavaScript in there that's doing weird stuff that's making it so that it's not even telling you like half the pages that people, or the views that people are actually looking at. Like what a page actually is a really weird reification in the world of the web, because there is no page. It's like it's the way the thing is constructing the page on the fly, and it's amazing how many checkout processes. Like the only thing they're really measuring is sort of who goes in and who goes out, but what happens in that twisted digestive system, they have no idea when people are bailing or why, because they're not even tracking it. They probably giant retailers I've seen just have this one giant JavaScript that just swallows the shopper and then poops them out the other end, and you have no idea analytically what's going on in between. No idea, right? But the spaghetti, but getting in there and teasing that apart so that you can know is impossible, because there's so much business rules instantiated and all that crazy, like digestive plumbing. Oh, it's crazy. So if you look at the analytics from that, and the marketing person's like, well, it's obvious that what we need to do is this. And you're like, no, that's not even real. That's not even reality. That's nothing to do with what people are actually doing. So you have to know where your numbers are coming from. More often than not, they're poorly put together. More often than not, just the source. If it's a survey, almost nobody knows how to make a good survey. They're really hard to do. Anyway.
Well, I hate to cut Andrew off, but
I have to actually go.
He has to go. And this Saturday, it's true, isn't it? This Saturday is World Information Architecture Day. And there's going to be a full day of things at Rackham. And it's going to be fantastic. And Andrew is going to be speaking there. And it's going to be great. So show up on Saturday at Rackham. There'll be cool information architecture things happening all day. And for the remaining half hour, why don't you all go to your rooms, and I'll pull up the slide if you don't remember. Does everybody remember where that was? Okay, I'll put it up. And talk about these modes of information. You all went and visited buildings, some pretty interesting ones. These modes of information were operative there, and even while you didn't have these things in mind during your visit, I think it would be worth talking about, were they present in the building that you visited? So let me find that list.
And you're welcome to post this, but I totally was like profane all over the place. So.
No, that tends to drive page views. Analytics. Crap. Hang on. Class 2. Yes, okay. Group time. Group 1, 2185. Group 2, 1243. Group 3, 1286. Group 4, stay here.
Thanks, Dan.
Do some of these rooms not exist?
See you later.
Oh, West Quad.
North Quad.
Oh, West. Oh, we're in North Quad. You know, my then girlfriend, now wife, stayed in West Quad, so that's why I'm thinking of North Quad or West Quad. There we go. Wow. Semantic information fail. There we go. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. It's just gonna get too loud if everybody's in here. So I realize this will leave you like 15 minutes to talk, but that might be enough. Yeah, I wish I didn't have to shut him down there. He was on a tear. Yeah, Andrew Hinton unplugged.
Yeah.